Hey there guys, guess what? I finally caught a piece of Star Wars news early, which, if you watch this channel, almost never happens. Like, I just found out that Vader was Luke's father, and that Luke and Leia really didn't know they were sister and brother. I always thought, like, Star Wars was trying to normalize incestual relationships, so this kind of changes the entire tone and vibe of Star Wars for me. I'm gonna have to go back and probably redo a few thousand videos. Anyway, the creators of Skeleton Crew just had a round table where they got together, joked around about stuff, and while watching this, it sort of dawned on me. Despite what all the ads are showing us, despite this being a Disney TV series, it's not really geared towards kids. Not in the way, movies like The Goonies or Honey, I Shrunk the Kids were targeting a younger audience when we were growing up. And I think that has to do a lot with just the taste of modern audiences. And also the vibes I'm getting from the people at this roundtable. For those of you who don't know, this show will be led by Jon Watts and Christopher Ford.
It's really fun to be able to write a show with your best friend and then make it with all of your friends. And we're really, really fortunate.
They're best known for their collaboration on Spider-Man Homecoming, which Christopher Ford wrote and Jon Watts directed. Jon Watts also directed the rest of that Spider-Man trilogy. But what you probably have never heard of are the movies these two collaborated on when they were much younger, straight out of film school. They made two truly horrifying films, one called Clown. It's a story about some poor dad who's just trying to make his kid happy by putting on a clown suit for his birthday, but that clown suit ends up fusing to his body because it's actually the skin of some demon, and it's pretty gruesome. He tries to cut it off of his body, but it is his body. And then there's the other film, Cop Car, which is a story of two kids stealing a cop car that actually belongs to a seriously corrupt murdering cop played by Kevin Bacon. And so, their earlier work is basically the Tarantino double-header grindhouse. So yeah, Jon Watts and Christopher Ford really enjoy the horror genre. Remember that about these two guys, because it's important for this video. The rest of the team are Jack Schreier, who knows Watts and Ford from way back. They all founded Waverly Films together.
I'm just their roommate from college. So.
He also directed the film Robot and Frank, a film about dementia and grand larceny, which is a surprisingly good alibi, and also very heartwarming.
Thank you, Frank. It's time for your enema.
Then we have Star Wars TV show specialist Bryce Dallas Howard, following in her father Ron's footsteps, transitioning from respected on-screen personality to behind the camera. She also attended NYU at the same time as those other three I just mentioned. I guess it's a small world. And then there's David Lowery over in the corner. He directed Peter Pan, which featured Jude Law as Captain Hook. Another film where Jude Law has a very questionable relationship with a bunch of children, and I think that is actually the energy and vibe they're going to go with with Skeleton Crew. And lastly, rounding off the list of episode directors, we have the Daniels from Everything Everywhere All at Once. It's a good movie, a bit overrated if you ask me, but solid. And so while watching this roundtable, first, it's great to see individuals who actually know each other from other things before. I feel like Disney is always throwing a bunch of mercenaries together to create shows. It's kind of like the Reservoir Dogs-style Joker robbery in Dark Knight. You can't just throw randoms together and expect it to work, and I feel like that's been their strategy for a really long time. I think having people who actually like each other working together will make a better product. I mean, it should be obvious, but it's not, I guess.
Skeleton Crew is about friends. It's by friends for friends. Yeah. Starring friends. This is what it's going to be like.
And more importantly, if you haven't been following the coverage of this show, these guys keep mentioning Amblin Entertainment when they talk about influences for Skeleton Key.
On a kind of Amblin adventure. It's going to be a little bit of this Amblin wonder magic.
Amblin reference is so...
Amblin movies have that spirit.
What is Amblin Films or entertainment? Well, for kids growing up in the 80s and 90s, it was everything. Unlike today, where children have millions of different entertainment options at their fingertips, from skibbity toilet to online Cambodian cockfighting. I mean, back then, there was just less stuff for us to consume in all manners of things. I mean, nowadays, you have, porn everywhere you look, with new genres being created every day. When I was a kid, I mean, seeing a boob, just one boob, was a fucking huge deal. And you would remember that. It would be imprinted in your brain, and it was like an important moment. And it rarely ever happened. As a matter of fact, we used to have our own stashes, and it wasn't even porn. There was just like random clippings from advertisements, like some girl in a bikini from a plastic surgeon advertisement, or if you're really like open-minded, maybe some clippings out of National Geographic. You know, I'm not one of those guys who says, oh, things were better back then, because in all honesty, it was weird and desperate back then. Like, I don't remember it all very fondly. But I guess the point is we were not bombarded by stuff, and so we appreciated what we got a lot more. And when it came to content for kids, movies for kids, it was really just controlled by a handful of, a few production companies. And so while there was less diversity in content than what we have today, I would say that there was like a gatekeeping. There was a certain level of quality to the content that you definitely don't see nowadays. It's kind of all over the place, for better or worse. But yeah, in Amblin Entertainment, along with Lucasfilm, that was our childhood. Amblin made Jurassic Park, Back to the Future, Schindler's List, E.T., The Goonies. Just great adventure films for kids to watch that imparted really good lessons about life and morality. And, you know, like kids who had really boring childhoods or really terrible childhoods, we would oftentimes form memories with these films. I mean, that's how important these movies were. They became a part of our identity and personality. But here's the thing, I sound old as hell talking about Amblin Entertainment, because as much as I love Spielberg, his movie studio hasn't really done anything that great recently. I mean, they've been milking the crap out of Jurassic Park still. I don't even know what number movie they're on, but they're still making them. And then, like, I recently saw they made a sequel to Twister. Twisters.
This is getting out of hand. Now there are two of them.
Okay, I actually heard it was a pretty good film. And Lee Isaac Chung directed it, and he's also going to be on the team for Skeleton Crew. He's the other director I didn't mention yet. All of these people at the table in this interview, they just gush about how much they love Amblin Entertainment, which is a sign that you're getting old. Show creator John Watts really talks about the most, and I can't blame him. You know, I think there's all sorts of different types of creators, and he's the kind who really digs back into nostalgia, back into his childhood. And he hasn't lost that part of himself, which is kind of miraculous because he's in his 40s, you know. And I think that speaks in the content he makes, right? He's always trying to look back and capture that feeling of what it's like to be a kid. There's something really nostalgic about his Spider-Man films, a longing for going back, I don't know, home, one might even say. I mean, he even bought back Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield. I mean, that whole last film was just a nostalgia trap. I don't even know if it was good or not, but I did leave the theater feeling a bit used or exploited. But yeah, this guy makes a living making us long for simpler times when emo Spider-Man and trying to explain to people that Gwen wasn't Mary Jane was the most difficult stuff we had to deal with on a daily basis.
I grew up in Colorado in the middle of nowhere, and we just go for walks out in these like fields with nothing around, and you're just hoping that you go on a kind of Amblin adventure. That's just what we grew up with, and that's the kind of adventure that we were always looking for as kids.
And his team is fully on board with this.
Yeah.
The Amblin reference is so a part of us because we were raised in that world.
And all those people sitting around that table are 43 years old, which means they're really early millennials or they're really late Generation X. And, you know, as a prime millennial myself, I gotta say, we don't really understand the younger kids. Even if we try very hard to, I think there's just been such a huge gap in how the world has changed. Like that whole reference about just like running in the fields in Colorado, like have you been to Colorado lately? They had to recently pass a law that legally allowed kids to play outside by themselves and not have that be considered neglect or abuse by the parents. This was after 221,000 complaints were logged with Child Protective Services about kids just running around having fun by themselves. And, you know, Karens aren't the only barrier for kids living a normal, or what we considered a normal childhood. There's also, you know, forest fires, mass shootings, and it's not just in Colorado, it's everywhere. You know, I personally am going to try to give my kid as independent of a childhood, as special of a childhood as I possibly can, even if it means hiring Liam Neeson to shadow her around. But it's a tough thing to do, you know, for better or worse. Kids grow up very differently now. Their lives are more online. They have larger communities, but at the same time, less personal interaction with actual people. And so this idea from John Watts of a bunch of kids going on their own adventure by themselves. I don't actually know if that's a common shared experience or something that kids even want nowadays. And I think that sentiment belongs in a different world, in a past where maybe people weren't very aware of all the dangers in the world. I wouldn't say that we were dumber back then. We just weren't bombarded by psychopathic YouTubers who prey on our fears and news agencies that have to come up with stories in the 24-hour news cycle. I mean, people nowadays are just so much more knowledgeable about everything around them, and I think it drives us crazy, knowing just how many threats and dangers there are in the world. Humanity today is probably better informed than it's ever been before. The problem is we're not really good at contextualizing that information and acting off of that information. I hope I'm wrong about all of this, but then again, when I see that kids nowadays are more likely to watch someone else play video games than try and play it themselves, well, I do feel like young audiences' tastes have changed. It's just not the same. So I have to ask, are Amblin-inspired films really for the kids of today? I mean, would these films even be successful nowadays? Or is this really just a bunch of sad adults trying to relive their childhoods through nostalgia?
There's that sense of wanting to go on an adventure as a kid, but I think anyone can remember that moment, like when you're a kid and you sort of expect that, like, maybe all adults will be safe and helpful, and then you realize that, like, adults are complicated and the world is not. And that's even in Goonies, it's this, like, realization that adults don't always have your best interest at heart or want to do things. I just thought there was something really, really resonant about that.
Why does David Lowery look like he never gave back those child actors after he finished Peter Pan?
It's this, like, realization that adults don't always have your best interest at heart or want to do things.
I kid. But yeah, I like Jake. He's the realest out of this group of narcissists, and I say that in like a really mild way. You have to love yourself a little bit to actually think you're worthy of creating content. But what Jake is talking about here are just more mature themes, or just themes in general, which you only really get to see in kids' films that are actually made for a wider audience, that are good.
To be clear, we want to make sure that everyone gets it's stars for kids, but it is not a kids show. It is...
Right, you think it's about, they like to say it's like as much for kids as Clone Wars. I'm like, well, we cut people's heads off in Clone Wars, so.
Filoni is such a fucking nerd.
One of us, gobble gobble, one of us, we accept that one of us.
But yeah, they mention this a lot. This is not a kid's show.
So you'd make 4 10-year-old kids your main characters, but it's not a kid's show. It's not a kid's film. The thing that made those Amblin movies have that spirit were grown-up films that just happened to star kids. You're still making the stakes really real. You're still making it dangerous. You're combining that, childlike sense of wonder with a real dangerous world.
And so back to Jake's comment and also his, sad self-reflection on his own childhood. When he talks about how there's a moment when you realize all adults aren't safe or helpful, well, I feel like that's where Jude Law comes in, right? He's kind of perfectly cast for this role. I love Jude Law as an actor. When I was growing up, he was the man. He was one of the biggest leading actors. But then in the last 10 years or so, I don't know if it's his receding hairline or just his wide range as an actor, but he's really embraced the more dark side of his personality, especially when he's performing around kids, whether he's playing Captain Hook or in AI where he's the mentor of a kid robot, but in reality is just a broken sex robot who is far less advanced and impressive than the kid. I think in a lot of ways, Jude Law is probably going to make or break this TV series, and judging by his experience and his skills in other movies, I think he'll do fine here. This is going to be an adventure, but one fraught with real dangers and potential betrayals. There will also be an awakening to a loss of innocence for these kids as they leave the proverbial moisture farm on Tatooine for the first time. The stakes will be smaller in this TV series. This is post-Return of the Jedi, after all. Nothing really is going to happen, beyond a few blue boys running around in their shiny shoes issuing parking tickets.
Nice shoes. Matches his belt.
But at the same time, these kids aren't going to have Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda. They're just going to have sketchy-ass Jude Law. And if you listen to these writers talk about what influences their show, it sounds like he's going to be a pirate.
It's fun to have a genre as an entry point to help you sort of explore a different section of the Star Wars world. And we went back and watched like old pirate serials from like the 20s and 30s, and that was a really fun entry point.
He's actually supposed to be a Jedi or a Force user. Whatever it is, it's going to be pretty interesting, I think. But then again, I'm always optimistic about things to a certain extent. I like Star Wars for the lore, for the world building. But I think this show is not going to be really rich in that way. Skeleton Crew will try to do is capture the Amblin film vibe, that, let's be honest, Stranger Things completely ripped off and then knocked out of the park. And by the way, the core demographic for that show is not as young as you think. It's more like 18 to 34 males. This was not a show that was widely watched by like 9 or 10 years olds. And that's probably a good thing because this was a pretty scary TV show. And there's also really Star Wars' core demographic as well. The ones who grew up with Amblin, who are now sad adults like me. I hope this will really be a recipe for success, though. And I hope Disney is smart enough to be a little more hands-off with this TV series and allow the directors to explore their passions. You know, clown demons and psycho cops and all. Because ultimately, the best films are the ones that are created by passionate people who really enjoy what they're doing. Not individuals who are, you know, forced to follow a guideline and check boxes. Yeah. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. Let me know in the comment section below what you guys think about Skeleton Crew. Are you guys excited? Are you not? Either way, we'll be watching it here and we'll be covering it here. My name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.